Pronouncing Italian last names correctly can be a real challenge for non-native Italian speakers. So a couple of weeks ago, I asked my subscriber to share their Italian last names for a video dedicated to their authentic Italian pronunciation. And I received so many that I had to make a second video. So here it is today. As I've said before, it's completely normal and understandable for Italian names to be mispronounced by non-native speakers. Other languages have different pronunciation systems, and they naturally apply those to any foreign word, including Italian last names. So in today's video, we will have a look at more Italian last names and how we pronounce them in standard Italian. And as always, I will explain the most common patterns and tricky aspects. Again, if you don't have an Italian last name, please remember that these patterns apply to any Italian word. So this can still be extremely helpful to you too. Ok, iniziamo. Let's begin. Let's have a look at this first name. This in Italian is pronounced as Taddeo. Taddeo. Now, it's very interesting because the person who sent me this told me that in his country they pronounce it as Tadio or Tatio. Pretty different, hmm? So let's see what's going on here. First of all, we have, this is a last name that has double consonants. And as I've said before, we always pronounce double consonants. How? What's the difference with one consonant? We keep the sound for longer. So this is a D sound, and in order to make it a double consonant sound, we just keep the sound for longer. We elongate the sound. So D, D. Second, this last name has consecutive vowels. If your last name or any Italian word has two or more vowels next to each other, you need to make sure to pronounce each one of them like you would if they were self-standing. This is different from English. In English, you tend to make a sound that's different from the single vowels, but in Italian, you just pronounce every single vowel always the same way. So this pair of vowels is pronounced as e, o, and then you just put them together, eo, eo. So keep this in mind for any name or Italian word that has consecutive vowels, so more than one vowel, more than two vowels next to each other. Okay, the third point I want to highlight with this last name is that the stress is placed on the e. So this is a difference with the English pronunciation because this is pronounced as Taddeo, Taddeo. So every Italian word has a stress, and the stress falls usually, the general rule is the stress falls on the second to last syllable, which it's usually the second to last vowel. That's the general rule for Italian last names and Italian words in general. And this last name follows the general rule. So the stress is on the second to last vowel, the I, in Italiano, e. So what does that mean in practice? It means that you have to spend a little bit more time on that vowel where the stress falls. This way you will have perfect pronunciation. So let's repeat this the correct Italian way. Taddeo, Taddeo. And now let's hear again the non-native way. Tatio, Tatio. Can you hear the difference now? It's pretty amazing. So remember, this is Taddeo. Ok, prossimo nome. Next name. This in Italian is pronounced as Arico. Arico. And this is a perfect example of an exception to the rule I just explained to you. So the general rule for stress placement in Italian is that the stress falls on the second to last vowel. But in this specific name, we have one of the main exceptions, which is that the stress falls on the third to last vowel, which in this case happens to be the very first vowel of the name. So if you listen carefully, you can hear that I'm spending more time on the beginning, on the first vowel, which is the a. Arico, arico. So this is an exception, and we have several words that follow this exception pattern, even with Italian words, not just with Italian names. Ok, un altro esempio. This last name is pronounced as 𝗲𝗔𝗓, 𝗲𝗔𝗓. Now, I want you to notice that there's a mark on the final I. What's that? That's where the stress falls in this word. And in Italian, that's the only case where we do write the stress mark, when the stress falls on the last vowel. Think of words that you probably already know, like caffè or papà. Those words all share the stress on the last vowel, and you can notice that because they have a stress mark on that last vowel. Now, what's interesting about this is that the person who sent me this wrote it like this. And if it were spelled like that in Italy, we would pronounce that differently, because that would go back to the general rule and would be 𝗲𝗔𝗓, 𝗲𝗔𝗓. Can you hear the difference? 𝗲𝗔𝗓, 𝗲𝗔𝗓. Okay, continuiamo. Let's move on with more Italian last names. And this next one is very interesting. Let's take a little bit more space. And it is this one. Now, I think this one can feel pretty intimidating, so I'm going to read this and then I'm going to explain this. This in Italian is Lavorgna, Lavorgna. Now, why is this so tricky? First of all, as I've explained before, we have the Italian A sound, which is pretty different from English. In Italian, the A sound is an open sound and it's pronounced like this, A. Ah, so you open up your mouth very well. So if you have an A in your Italian last name, just pronouncing it the correct Italian way, like A, will give you an immediate result of sounding more native. So this is la, la. Try that yourself. Perfetto. Of course, this applies to any Italian word that has this sound, like donna, mamma, casa, and so forth. Or even the article, the Italian article la. The A is always open. Keep that in mind. Then we have another vowel that can be tricky for non-English, non-Italian native speakers, which is the O. Now, I can imagine this last name being pronounced in English, this is very complex, as like something like Livornia or Livornia, so like with a new sound. So the tricky part is also the O. Why? Because in English, you tend to pronounce oftentimes the O is pronounced with a U sound, like O. In Italian, that never happens, ever. The Italian O is always a short O sound, so no U sound. If you need a U sound, you need to spell it in Italian. If you don't spell the U, you don't have any U sound. So this is O, O. So let's put it together. Lavo, lavo. You can repeat after me for practice. Lavo. So remember, if you have an O in your last name or you see an O in any Italian word, make sure to not add a U sound to it, but just O. Okay, then we have the Italian R, and that's, I know, a dreadful topic, but as explained before, the Italian R is complex for non-native Italian speakers and especially for English speakers. And the first reason for that is the placement of the tongue when we make the sound. In English, when you make the R sound, your tongue is more in the back of your mouth. In Italian, when you make the R sound, your tongue is more in the front of your mouth. That's the first difference that you need to be aware of. Then, of course, we do make the sound, the tongue vibrate. We do make a rolling sound, but that takes practice. So that can be really hard to master. At first, you need to make some specific exercise to develop this ability. And those are the exercises I always have my students make in preparation to pronouncing R words correctly. So for now, don't be hard on yourself. Just focus this first thing, which is just move your tongue in front of your mouth to make the Italian R. Okay. And finally, we have the ñ sound. Now, this sound can be very tricky for non-native Italian speakers, especially English one. It's very similar to the ñ sound in Spanish. So if you know Spanish, that's an advantage. If you don't, here's how you can make this sound. When you do the n sound, just push the tip of your tongue against the back of your upper teeth, like this. Ñ, ñ. And by the way, this is exactly the same sound that you have in gnocchi. So, as always, Italian food can be a great reference for correct Italian pronunciation. We said before that pizza is a good reference for pronunciation, and gnocchi is also a good reference for the ñ sound. So whenever you see a GN in Italian, think of gnocchi and push your tongue. Ñ, ñ. So this final part of the word is pronounced as gna, gna. Let's put everything together. Lavorgna, lavorgna. Perfetto, molto bene. Now, as you can see, behind a simple Italian last name or Italian word, there's a ton of pronunciation points that make it tricky to pronounce, especially if you're a native English speaker. That's why I've created a comprehensive program to help you master Italian pronunciation. It's called Italian Pronunciation Club, and it is now open for you to enroll. In this program, we will cover everything you need to master authentic Italian pronunciation and dramatically improve your listening and comprehension skills. From mastering vowels to conquering the rolling R, from understanding stress patterns to perfecting consonant combinations, it will be all there in one step-by-step program. And to celebrate, right now I am offering a special launch price of 30% off. But please notice that this offer will only be available until Sunday, so don't miss it. Just click on the link in the description of this video. And now, torniamo ai cognomi italiani. Let's go back to Italian last names. Let's have a look at some very peculiar Italian last names, like this one. This one in Italian is Ganassin. Ganassin. The main peculiarity of this last name is that it ends in a consonant. And this is not common with Italian words and Italian last names. Because you have probably noticed, and I always repeat this, that the Italian words usually end in a vowel, and that vowel is crucial to be pronounced correctly because it has meaning, an important meaning for the word. Well, we do have exceptions to that, of course, and one main exception is Italian last names, especially this is a typical pattern of northern Italy, like the Veneto region or the Piemonte region have a lot of these last names ending in consonant. So this is the first peculiarity that I wanted to show you. The second one is that in this last name that end with a consonant, the stress is usually placed on the last vowel, but it's not stressed because it's the last vowel, but not the last letter of the word. So this is not pronounced as Ganassin, but it's pronounced as Ganassin. Ganassin. I'm spending more time on the final I. Ok, un altro esempio, like this one, is Martiner. Martiner. So again, we have a last name that ends with a consonant. This tells me that the last name is originally from northern Italy. And the stress is on the final E. So that's where I'm spending a little bit more time. Martiner. Martiner. Okay. Another one that has the same pattern but adds another important point, is this one. This in Italian is pronounced as faggin. Faggin. But I can imagine this being mispronounced as fagin. So what's the point here? What's the difficulty here? When you have a G in Italian, and that G is followed by an I, that turns the sound of the G into a soft sound, which is J, J. Very similar to the English judge, the sound that you have in judge. When you have a G followed by an I, you never ever pronounce that as G, G. No, this is a soft G sound. So the correct pronunciation for this is faggin, faggin. Okay, speaking of local variations, there's an interesting ending that tells you that the name is probably from Sardinia. Let's have a look at this. This in Italian is pettinao, pettinao. So here's it very important as always to pronounce the consecutive vowels correctly. Ow, ow. And so pronounce every single one and then put them together. A, U becomes ow. Two consonants, petti, petti, and together it becomes pettinao, pettinao. And that U ending tells you that this last name is probably from Sardinia, the island of Sardinia, La Sardegna. There are plenty of last names in Italy that end in U, and they are originally from Sardinia. Okay, now let's see some more beautiful Italian last names. The next one I have for you is this. De Simone. De Simone. Now, as I've said before, when you have an ending E, you need to make sure to never skip it and pronounce it correctly. And the correct pronunciation is never E, but it's E. It's a closed E sound. So this is not Di Simoni, it's not Di Simon or something like that. It's De Simone. This pattern of de something, it's a common pattern in Italian last names, especially in central Italy. So if you have a de as at the beginning of your last name, make sure to pronounce it correctly with the e sound. De Simone. Okay. Another example of this, de Corrado. De Corrado. Here we have a double D sound, double R sound, so you need to keep the R sound for longer. Corrado, Corrado. Molto bene. Now, you probably have you may have a variation of this, which is present in this last name. This is Di Bella in Italian. Di Bella. And this shows you how, in order to do the E sound, we need a different vowel in Italian, because the E sound is linked to the I in Italian, not to the E in English E. So if you have an I after the D, you want to pronounce it as E. Di Bella. Di Bella. Both spellings are common in Italy. So we have a lot of de last names and a lot of di last names. And sometimes we have the same last name in both variation. Like the person who sent me this last name told me. He told me an interesting story about the fact that when his family moved to a place in the US, there was already another family with this last name. So to differentiate themselves, they changed the last name from Di Bella to De Bella, which is actually another common last name in Italy. So listen up for the difference. If you have the last name that has a D, it's Di Bella. If you have a last name that has the De, it's De Bella. Va bene? Perfetto. And that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this second round of beautiful Italian last names pronounced the native Italian way. Now, also remember that the Italian Pronunciation Club, my comprehensive program to learn Italian pronunciation, is now available for enrollment with a special 30% off launch price only until Sunday. So if you want to master Italian pronunciation once and for all, this is your chance. Just click on the link in the description of this video. And I will see you in the next one. Ciao, ciao!